Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. My name is Darshan Kulkarni, and it's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As some of you have heard apparently near daily from me, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have an interest in an FDA regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast is from a guest we've had before. She is, I want to make sure I get this right. She has over 20 years in clinical development. She was originally going to go down and be a consultant, but instead decided to get into medical writing, and she wanted to tell the story. And she does tend to focus on quote unquote the big picture. Our guest for today, founder and president of Whitsell Innovations, Robin Whitsell. Hey, Robin, how are you?
Darshan, I'm doing well. Yep. So
It's
I
good.
think my background was clinical development, but I worked for a startup. So I did all the writing too. And that was how I got into medical writing. And then when I first sort of hung out my own shingle, I thought I would be doing clinical development consulting, but found a great need in medical writing. So I was happy to land there. Can we talk about your haircut? I love the haircut.
We want to talk about how someone really messed this up, but to be fair, they didn't have much to work with. So you know what? It is what it is.
No, I like it. It feels fresh. It's kind of a new look for you.
The bushy things down. Okay, I can work with that.
Well, I think we all are hopefully are starting to emerge from COVID, and we get to like go back. And I'm thinking about like a big haircut because I literally have not cut my hair since the beginning of COVID, so it might be time and fun.
Okay. Well, we're seeing big changes. We're seeing the treadmills come out from the background. We're seeing the STEMinist t-shirts come out. We have many changes happening. So for those of you who are actually just listening to this, Robin's wearing a STEMinist t-shirt, and I was going to make the point of, well, what was the reason for it, and we actually landed up talking a little bit about that. So tell us the origin of where did you even get that shirt?
uh, Gosh, what a great question that I need to remember the answer to. I think we had an internal conversation inside WI about cheeky T-shirts or snarky T-shirts, and you know, I probably was like looking online on Amazon or something. I was like, ooh, STEMinist, I love it. So I got it, but I think there are people who, I mean, clearly play on words, STEM and feminist. There are people for whom maybe that might not be their cup of tea. I live in North Carolina, and we're a pretty diverse state. And where I live in Chapel Hill, probably people would smile and think my shirt was cute. Other parts of our state, maybe less so. So, cheeky T-shirt day.
So tell me that though. You're saying that some parts of the state would think that that's cheeky, some parts of it wouldn't. So what part of it makes it less their cup of tea?
Well, I mean, I think a word like feminist has pretty much always been a fairly loaded word. So
Okay.
that's probably the start of it. And I think there's always kind of push and pull around science and biotechnology and these concepts. So I can see where those are, and that versus kind of traditional values kind of thing. But I can, these are things.
Yeah, no, no,
Uh,
no. This is not a judgment question. This is an understanding
sure,
question. So what
sure.
I'm what I'm trying to understand though is you're saying that STEM, which usually stands for science, technology, engineering, medicine, is a loaded term. Have you seen that be different in a time of COVID where people are going, you know what, I know what she does, or has that still not changed?
In a time of COVID, honestly, I don't leave the house much, so I'm not sure. Um, but I would say pre-COVID, it would have been a little bit. I think maybe post-COVID, there might be more appreciation for kind of how amazing STEM is and how amazing the scientists who work in STEM are. I mean, pretty much if you think about the fact that we had a vaccine right now is nothing short of the Apollo 13 for our industry. You don't
Yeah.
get a vaccine in like 10 years is great. 5 years, amazing. Under 2 years, almost incomprehensible for those of us who've been in this industry a long time. But I think it also speaks to the fact that the science behind this has been around for a decade. The people that were doing this work have been working, the basic scientists have been out there hammering around with, what is a coronavirus? What do those spikies mean? What kind of proteins are we talking about? Like there have been people out there doing that work. And when this hit all of us, the entire industry was able to leverage that work and come up with solutions, which again, it's stunning. It's amazing. So,
Which is an interesting comment. Are you making the comment that people are finally tuning in to technology that's been around for decades? But I guess the question I have is, and this is feedback I've actually gotten
sure.
from a neighbor of mine up in Delaware, down in Delaware, who said that this is great, but the product's not been FDA approved. I'm not willing to put anything into myself that's not been FDA approved. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think an emergency use authorization is not a non-approval. I think it's in some ways this is semantics. So the FDA is going to apply rigor to allowing anything into the marketplace. And that's because that's their job. Their job is looking at our food and our drugs and making sure that safety and efficacy are paramount. I mean, they're not going to compromise that.
Right.
The word safety for anybody who works in clinical development or in pharmaceutics is also a rather loaded term because nothing is safe, right? The best we can hope for is tolerable. And I think with the vaccines, we've seen where, for the most part, the vaccines that are approved in the United States are tolerable. Now, there's some questions around the J&J vaccine right now, which is why when FDA sees things, if there are signals in the marketplace, they press pause, they get more data. And that's how the scientific process should work, right?
So what I'm hearing you say is what you're a fan of is the idea of risk-based approval, knowing that there's a certain risk we're looking at, and the benefits of that outweigh the risks at this moment. And as we get more data, depending on what we find out, we can keep changing that equation. But there's no sense in keeping the product off the market when we have evidence that it works right now. Is that fair? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I'd say that's fair. I think we're in a pretty particular situation. I don't think that this is necessarily a universal concept, but I think in the situation we're in, and if we look at what's happened to our healthcare system and we look at how many people have died, it makes sense to take this approach. And I think our health authority, their whole role is trying to find ways to bring to the market therapeutics that are of the benefit to the patient. So in this case, they have enough information to say, hey, physicians, patients, understand what this is about and figure this out for yourself, right? So, I mean, there are patients for whom it's probably not a good idea, but for most people, it probably is a good idea. If you look at how many people, particularly more vulnerable people that have been administered these vaccines and are still doing okay, that's a really amazing sign. I mean, they really flipped the way that this product was released in the marketplace, flipped the typical approach of how you would look at this in clinical development, right? In the clinic, you'd have healthy people, and then you would expand that into a population of people with the disease, and then you'd expand that further into a population of older people, and then kids, et cetera. They did that somewhat inside of the clinical development for the vaccines, but really when they did the rollout, they started with the oldest in our population and probably the most vulnerable. And you're a pharmacist. Come on, Darshan, you know these things. Like the way old people process drugs, older people. I can see where like my mom is gonna like start texting me if she were watching this. Like, sweetheart, some people would call you old. I'm like, thanks, mom. But like people in their 60s and 70s and 80s, the way they process drugs is differently. The way glomerular filtration works for their bodies is different. So the fact that that the rollout started with older people and we did not see, you know, tons of serious adverse events, lots of, death, things like that. The fact that we saw a decline in the number of hospitalizations, the fact that among the people that are vaccinated, they're not dying. And if they get sick, it's not as severe. That's pretty amazing. Now, it has to hold up. Like if people did start reacting to a vaccine, that would be a different story. We'd have to start looking a little closer. But yeah, if that's what you're calling a risk-based approach, I'd say that's appropriate. What do you think?
I think I think that we are considering what facts we're working with, and it's actually in line with what the FDA has been talking about for the whole time. And but I do think that there is a perspective, right or wrong, that this is more rushed than we've done in the past. But is that necessarily a bad thing? I'm not convinced that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think we were trying to solve a problem, and the problem you're always, it doesn't matter what drug it is, even if you did this after 15 years, you're still going to come in with a risk-based approach.
For sure.
The question I have is you start with this concept of a risk-based approach. Post-COVID, do we get to use emergency use authorization for, say, pancreatic cancer?
I don't have enough historic knowledge in it. The only uses I've seen for the emergency use authorizations have been in situations of pandemic. So the 2009 flu pandemic, for example, and now. Yeah. So do we get to use it for cancer? I would say that there are enough expedited pathways through the FDA for pancreatic cancer, breakthrough therapy designation, inside of compassionate use designations, which I don't think that's the right actual term for it. I think it's called expanded access. Don't quote me. But, I think there are other ways. But those are ways that are smaller and more personalized. And I think if we're talking about a risk-based approach for something that isn't necessarily approved, those are probably smarter. This is a pandemic. This needs a bigger solution for a lot more people. So we're talking apples and oranges.
Okay.
My bigger hope is that science has learned stuff from this. A coronavirus vaccine and the technical approaches that were taken, the way that we didn't, there are different approaches with the different virus, but Moderna and Pfizer took a completely new approach to a vaccine. And I think there's stuff to be learned there. And I think, but don't quote me, I thought I saw a headline that they're already developed an Ebola vaccine based on that tech. Did you see that one?
I missed that. I did see, however, that the technology, the mRNA technology, is actually from the 80s, and people sort of abandoned it, and it became the savior for us 40 years later. If I remember correctly, it was an African American woman whose contributions were ignored, and it's kind of interesting.
Right?
It's fascinating for sure. It's a different story by itself. I guess the next question I have, and we started talking about this a little bit earlier, where you talked about your journey, and you were talking about your 20 years in clinical development, which has informed the conversation we're having right now. And what we got into was this, you said, I feel like an imposter.
I didn't say I feel like an imposter for spending 20 years in clinical development. I said, I think for a lot of us, what I had actually told you is I got a piece of feedback from a friend of mine that when I was introducing myself, I sounded tentative around saying, I'm the founder and president of this company. And she's like, said with love, you've done a really cool thing and you need to step into that. And what I said to you is, I think, and this is which I said to you, I think as a woman in the sciences, I do face that imposter syndrome, and I do face that thought, oh, people are gonna be like, oh, damn, she's a fraud. And you said to me, that you experienced that too, which I was stunned. But I mean, maybe this is something that's more rampant than we think.
I think we all face it, and I think it depends on especially who you're around.
Mm,
I find myself face. I have it less when I'm talking to CEOs because I think that I can go toe to toe on most of those conversations. I find it more interesting when I'm talking to government officials
mm,
because I find that um, because they are deciding whether my client's product can either stay on the market or this thing. I want to make sure that they recognize that I'm not bullshitting them. I recognize that the value that this is not about um, keeping a substandard product on the market. This is
right.
about bringing value to the patient and keeping patients safe. So I think that's the imposter part I worry about. I think
So your imposter piece is you're worried that as you represent this company, that it's disingenuous. Like you're there because this company wants to make some money, but you're really there because you are supporting this concept of bringing something new to the patients.
I think that's part of it. I also do think that from time to time I do feel, well, what does it say about me in terms of just the breadth I bring to the table? And I've gotten more and more comfortable with that for myself, but I definitely remember. I think it's a journey for the most part, being very tenuous about that. But I'd be curious from
It's a
your
good word.
perspective. Um, I'm fascinated by the idea that you started a very successful medical writing company. You have spent over 20 years in clinical development. You've written the story that most people dream of writing, and at the end of it, you feel like you aren't being like you're not representing yourself in a way that you believe in yourself, and you feel tenuous, if you will. So tell me more about that. Like if you were talking to Robin 20 years ago, what would you tell her, and why should she trust herself?
Um, so I think there's always this idea that I don't want to come across as arrogant or, like I think too highly of myself, and I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean, I'm used to being the geeky girl, so I guess that's a that's a bit of a more comfortable place for a bit of a more comfortable reality for me to live in, right? And I think it kind of some of it stems from that you have to kind of become braver in your own skin kind of thing.
yeah,
So I'd say that's more so. Like I mean, two, I don't have an advanced degree. So a lot of people in my field, as you know, two advanced degrees, um, people
great.
really the pedigree is important or perceived as important. So I think there's that piece. I think there's all, but I think like as I say these things, and when I was talking to you about it, I thought I guess any of us can create those stories. Like why I'm not as you know able to put myself out there as the person standing next to me. Um, I also do have a belief in the fake it till you make it kind of thing. Like, even if I don't feel brave, I need to like put on a brave face. Uh, I'll let you know how that's going.
Okay, so let's ask another version of that same question of being
Okay.
brave, of being scared of representing yourself, that truly represents yourself. One of the comments I'd read a long time ago was the two things most people are afraid of. Number one, no, number two is dying, and number one is public speaking. So
That's pretty funny.
I actually think it was part of a Seinfeld joke. But
Mm.
the reason I think that's interesting is you talked about telling a story. You talked about how you bring your part, an integral part of bringing a product to market. I guess my question to you is, um, how do you even help a company strategize around how to tell the story of their product? Are you helping them in the context of a single component, or do you actually help with the tentacles that almost come out from here's a product, here's your publication strategy, here's your regulatory strategy, here's your PR strategy. How do you bring it all together? What is it? Where do you begin from?
So I think we kind of might have touched on this a little bit. There's always the end in mind, which is where this therapeutic is going to land with the patient, right?
Yeah.
Who is this going to help?
Yeah.
And there's that piece. And then around who is it going to help, there's an ideal of what help would look like.
Yeah.
And that ideal might change based on what disease we're talking about, right? In particular, I think if you look at oncology, we ask patients to put up with a lot. I have one of my favorite people in the world is battling ovarian cancer, and a second favorite person in the world is battling neuroendocrine cancer. And for both of these women, the treatments are rough. It is hard. They feel bad. The side effects are stuff that in your normal life you'd think you were really deathly ill if they happened. So when you're telling the story of a drug and you're looking at how the drug is positioned, the first thing to look at is how it's landing with the patient. And is there any way to improve that? Is there any way to get to the final place and have, if in the case of oncology, less cytotoxicity, less side effects that are obtrusive for the patient, or limiting of their quality of life? So if I were thinking about those stories, and if I work in clinical development, I was working in here's the target, here's what we think it can do, I would try to work backwards and say, okay, what do we need to know as we try to get there? And what do we need to know as we get there that can inform how we create a drug that has fewer side effects, a drug that has more efficacy? And I think that's part of that whole process, is really thinking that through. And then when you go to design a clinical trial, the protocol, thinking about how burdensome is it for the patient to participate in this? In times of COVID, that was even like 10x. Like, can they even leave the house? So I think these are all parts of really understanding the story, understanding where you want to go, and then talking to your clients about how they construct their clinical studies, how they think about their clinical study reports, and the communications they're going to have with health authorities.
So to do that, you really have to be part of the team. And the team, often the companies you're dealing with might be smaller. They don't have a fully formed team, and everyone in there is probably an expert brought in from other places. I guess my question would be, when is the best time to call a medical writing company or Whitsell Innovation specifically? How early is too early? How late is too late?
So we work on investigational new drug applications. So we work at the very foundation of getting clinical development kicked off, right? And we have writers in our company who work on the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, who can help with some of even the very earliest stages of kind of positioning. And then we have writers who work in the non-clinical space, who are certainly the information and data you need before you even think about trying to design a clinical trial in humans. So we do work across all those domains, which I love. I think it's kind of the coolest thing ever. And some of our clients are huge pharma companies where we're supporting a specific program. Like, we're helping them with their submission, and maybe we're helping them with a global submission. We're helping them first with US or EU, but then responding to other markets as well. So it could be any of those things. So I think that's the kind of work we do, which I kind of love it. Like, I think I think what kind of gets me out of bed in the morning and makes me happy to go to work is, first off, I work with amazing people, and it not enough can be said about how much admiration I have for my coworkers. Secondly, if I'm really lucky, I get to talk about the patient, and that's a great day, right? Like, we've all been patients, we've all loved patients, so being able to be an advocate on the inside is is a privilege and one I take very seriously.
So you talk about work. The part that you love the most is working with your coworkers. You're in one of those unique positions where you chose your coworkers.
Right?
So here's my question. This is something that people always ask, right? People are like, how do I interview well? And my experience, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my perspective, and I want you to tell me how wrong I am. Right?
I might tell you how right you are. Come on, bring it. Let's see what you got.
Imposter syndrome. But my perspective is that if you got the interview, you already have the qualifications. Now, the interview at that point, what you're really trying to figure out is, can I tolerate being in the room for 8 hours with you? And that's
or the Zoom for 8 hours with you.
Exactly, or Zoom for 8 hours with you. Exactly, and that's my point. It's your qualifications, unless there was really a question there, which would be answered very quickly, and that's either a yes or a no. That's not a maybe. You're often, it's very clear whether you're qualified for the job or not. So when you're hiring someone, what do you look for in who your coworker is going to be? Who are these amazing coworkers, and how are they going to be part of your life?
Yeah. So I would say if there were kind of a common thread that sort of runs through our company, it's the concept of collaboration. Like, if I can help you in any way, I'm game. It's this concept of we make each other stronger by being a combined force. And that doesn't mean that somebody needs to be extroverted and always out there. That doesn't mean somebody needs to be, I'm not going to help you if I'm not 100% sure at all times of what I'm saying. It's more along the lines of, I'm willing to help you. And even if I don't have all the answers, or even if the help I'm giving you is, you're more expert at this than I am, but can I build a table for you? Can I review something for you to make sure it reads well? Can I be a sounding board for you to bounce ideas off of? So I think that's kind of what I love about my coworkers. Long time ago, I had read, like when I first started the company, I tried to consume as much as I could about how do you build a company and how do you build a culture, right? And what I knew I wanted was this idea of collaboration, of, we all do better together, right? What I also found interesting was that one of the things that led many companies to fail is that the people who start the company look for people that are just like them. So you get like one personality, one person.
Yeah.
The challenge there is that if everyone's just like me, no one's going to say to me, that might not be a great idea.
Right.
Because they're all going to be just like me. So it was really kind of looking for a diversity of voices. And that too, can be challenging,
Then how do you reconcile the diversity of voices?
You look for the common ground. Do we all want to collaborate? Do we all want to serve the patients? Do we all want to do great science? Do we all want to get it right? And then, do we have a diversity of educational backgrounds? Do we have a diversity of geographic backgrounds? Maybe even, how do we grow up? Was it different? I think we have to make sure that we have a diverse enough group, because we can get more ideas. And I love that. That's my jam.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you look for a diverse set of ideas, that they're going to bring it together, and if there is diversity of opinion, you quote unquote try to find the middle ground. But I guess what that risks far too often is what's often referred to as a camel is a horse by committee, or a
Right.
or
Or
what's the other one I've heard? The Solomon thing, which is let's split the baby in half.
sure.
And either way, that becomes problematic. So how do you go? Like, is there a mission statement or is there a mental goal that guides you through that decision making process?
Yes. Well, it's okay. We do have a mission statement,
Sure.
and it has to do with the themes that we've talked about. Serving the life science community, integrity, science. Putting the science and the patient first. I mean, those are sort of the core themes. And then around that, when we're talking to people who are interested in our company, we do ask questions about feedback. And we ask it in terms of real world, like, tell me about a time when. We don't do it to be mean per se, but rather to see, has this person been in this position and how do they respond? Feedback's hard. So that's one, because people are afraid of hurting other people's feelings usually. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe there are people who aren't. Maybe we don't want to work with them, but for the most part, I think there are ways that you can create space for people to get their ideas across.
Right.
And then at some point you have to jury some of the better ones. And you do, otherwise it is a cow by committee.
Trial by committee. I haven't heard that one before, but I'll take it.
Well, okay, so the one you probably have heard is, I think it's a Ross Perot quote. Like, you don't create a committee to kill a snake. You just kill the snake.
Right. Right.
Oh,
Right. Fair
right.
enough. Um,
How about
so
you? What would you do? What would be
how
your
would I?
approach?
My approach to dealing with conflict, I think it depends on the goal of the conflict, and I think there are different types of conflicts, right? So
Sure.
there's conflict where um, you're trying to solve a mission or you're trying to address a mission. And in that case, I think you look at the mission goals
Mm-hmm.
and you go, okay, the mission says that we have to achieve this. These different ideas that we're throwing out, yes, they could be very cool, but do they address the core mission goal?
Sure.
Then there are mission goals, and then there are my mission goals. And that, as I started at the start of the conversation itself, the reason I do what I do is to help patients trust the products they depend on. So
Mm-hmm.
if I cannot do that, if I cannot help patients trust the products they depend on, why am I doing it at all?
Sure. That's a sign that's not the spot you need to be in. Sure.
Exactly. So, because in the end, I find that you can have some easy wins,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it stays longer in my head if I don't make the harder decision and choose something that in the shorter term may end up hurting me, but in the longer term I can live with better. So I think so I don't necessarily choose by committee. I want the committee to give me their opinions, but in the end, I have to live with the results of that. So
Gotcha.
I think that becomes really important for me. I think the other thing I start thinking about is who owns that piece of the project. Because one of the things, and I struggle with this more than I probably should, is I know that I need to trust my team more. And
Mm.
I always think that I trust them implicitly and I trust them completely until I ask them for feedback and they're like, no, you need to give up a little bit more. I was like, okay, I need to learn that. But I think that I need to go with the decision they made
Mm.
because they were in charge of that part of it. And therefore, they made the decision based on the facts they had in their head. So if someone else is coming in and it's sort of Monday morning quarterbacking, that's
Mhm.
great. But maybe you can't Monday morning quarterback someone's decision in the heat of the battle. So if that's responsive.
Maybe. So, okay. Let me test that for you though. Let me pressure test that one.
Yeah.
What if you're sure they're wrong?
Um, who's the they? The
So you're
people
saying your
arguing?
team. You're
Okay.
saying you can't come in and Monday morning quarterback their decisions, but or and I think I didn't say and, right? And you're looking at this decision, you're like, I disagree.
So then you got to sort of pressure test it. So
Hmm.
that's when I go, okay, tell me why you're making the decision you're making. What is your logic? What is your reasoning? What did you know at the moment when you made the decision versus me coming in after the fact?
Sure,
So my experience often is that I'm working off of facts that are now available to me that they didn't have before, which renders their decision then completely reasonable, but now it's sort of completely unreasonable. So I have to give the benefit of the doubt to the decision that was made. Now, there are going to be still decisions where the answer was wrong even then. And then we've got to
sure,
either, then you've got to go, okay, so let's reassess. Is this a ethical disconnect? Is it a training disconnect? Is this a um, is this a lack of education disconnect? Each of those can be addressed differently. The lack of um, education and training is much easier to address. You provide the education and training.
sure,
The lack of ethical disconnect is a lot harder because for me, it comes down to a couple of different things. Number one, did I choose the team that was did I choose the wrong team member, or was this part of the factors you considered and there was just another bigger factor that I weighed
sure.
differently than you?
I think an ethical disconnect would be highly troubling for me.
Yeah.
That might be a hill I'd die on. Uh,
Well, would
I
you
would
though?
really, that'd really be a tell me more. Like I've got to understand more
Yeah.
because I can't go down that road.
That's exactly my point, though. I think that there are two types of ethical disconnects, right? You are in the vicinity
Hmm.
and you are completely off.
Right, right, right.
The
Sure.
you're in the vicinity is you had to choose to trust someone or you had to choose to move forward, and you made the choice to trust someone, or vice versa, and you made the decision you made. And yeah, in retrospect, that was a really bad decision. On
Sure.
the other hand, you just chose profits is problematic.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think part of distrust, right? Part
Yeah.
of distrust is the concept that companies choose profits over people.
Ooh, we're gonna have a fun time with this. You should actually. I, I've several different people I've interviewed on just the issue of trust in the life sciences. The
Really?
one interesting thing that's popped up, and you can listen to the podcast I've done
Hmm.
with Leah Brovodani and Natalie and stuff like that. I'm trying to get some very cool people on about trust. But the point
Oh,
being,
wait,
and
wait. Cooler than me? Come on now, Darshan.
to be fair, no one's cooler than you. I'm sorry.
I'm kidding.
Uh,
Anyway, we were saying
but the
trust.
point I was making was, did you know that trust and distrust are not the same thing? So it's not a spectrum where distrust is just lack of trust. It turns out it's
Okay,
a
tell
totally
me more.
different
This is
thing.
very interesting. So
I thought
trust and
about,
distrust are not a spectrum.
no, it's not a spectrum. So it turns out people think that if I give you more information, you'll trust me more. But
Mm.
if they distrust you, this problem is fundamentally broken. You've got to address the distrust before you can start building the trust. I thought that was fascinating.
I actually that makes a lot of sense to me.
In
That makes
retrospect, it does.
well, no, well, the way you're saying it. So, um, like my husband and I would joke about this person, and it was, I've made up my mind. Don't trouble me with the facts.
Yeah,
Like I've already
exactly.
made a decision. So really, if they've already made this decision, these
Yeah,
facts you're giving them don't prove
correct.
anything. So
Correct.
these facts you're giving them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that. That seems to make a lot of sense. But
So, yeah.
yeah.
Well, we can keep going. I mean, I usually aim for 20 to
Oh,
30 minutes, but we're
dude, we're at time. You got to leave them wanting more.
this was super, super fun. Let me ask you, what is a question you'd like to ask the audience?
A question I would like to ask the audience. How about you asked about interviewing and finding your people. What's the best question they've ever had when they've been interviewed?
What is the best question they've ever had when they've been interviewed? What are some questions you throw out there?
Pardon me?
What are some options you might throw out there?
I hear these questions that are like, tell us your strengths and weaknesses. And people are always like, their weaknesses, they work too much. I feel like those are so silly. So, but
Right.
what's something that's been a question that was asked that was really kind of eye-opening for them or reveals their personality? We had to check like what are like legal questions you can ask people, and we like to ask people like what they do outside of work, like what they do for fun, right? And there have been times in my life where the window would have been, does laundry count? Because, I have 4 kids and I don't really do fun because I'm busy with the maintenance, custodial stuff. So I've even seen that question stump people. But yeah, like what's a question that reveals someone's personality and helps you have a conversation with them, helps them sort of enjoy the conversation with you in an interview setting that's legal.
I love it. Let's ask that, see what the group says. Just to clarify, so far we've landed up talking about cheeky t-shirts. We've spoken about risks and benefits. We've
Yep.
talked about hairstyles. We've talked about patient education. We've talked about what does the future look like in terms of, is it going to be more risk-based, and will the EUA come back in other contexts? We spoke about telling your story, and to do that starting with the end in mind. We talked about the story of the drug, and you talked about your experiences with your friends and the perspective of cytotoxicity and how they have to deal with it, and how you would prefer to deal with that situation if you were telling that story in the future. We spoke a little bit about when is it too early or too late for a group like Whitsell Innovations to come in. And we talked about how you choose your coworkers. And collaboration is a component of that. Did I miss anything?
We did all that in 42 minutes. Good Lord. Amazing. I think you got it all.
Okay. Just to clarify, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind or regulatory advice. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, Robin, where can they reach you?
I'm Robin Whitsell, and you can find us on our website, whitsellinnovations.com. And there are links to get to me or us.
Perfect. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Robin, this was awesome. Thank you so much again.
As always, nice to see you, Darshan. Take care.